Welcome to the Love Now Movement interview series hosted by Australian powerhouse spiritual teacher Susie Mazzoli. Together with a New York filmmaker Kevin Lewis, presents cutting-edge information in the field of consciousness, spirituality, science, and culture. We present in-depth interviews with the international movers and shakers, agents of change, and explore our rapid, expanded world. Come and join us on our Love Now across the world.
We're here in the home of John Anthony West, author of Serpent in the Sky, also Emmy winner for his documentary on Egypt. And I must say that I'm very honoured to speak with you again, and that I'm so excited to hear that so much of your information is really starting to get out there into the world, even more to the general public. And I found now that even though so much information is out there now about ancient Egypt and about the origins of mankind, that there's still so much resistance to really understanding like where we come from and what is our human history. So for those people that know nothing, absolutely nothing, except what they've been taught in school, right. Which is definitely nothing, for those people that have still not heard anything about the real origins of mankind, could you just give us a really beautiful synopsis of all of this incredible work that you have done, all this research? What can you tell us? What is the truth about Egypt?
25 words or less. Basically, everything that you have been taught about ancient Egypt via academic Egyptology is incorrect as interpretation. In other words, the facts are correct by and large, but the interpretation is completely off. In other words, it's based upon the central dogma of what I call the reigning religion of our time, which is the Church of Progress. And the central dogma of the Church of Progress, as its Immaculate Conception, as it were, or its equivalent to the Immaculate Conception, is that we are more advanced in every possible way over our more advanced than anything in the past. So ancient Egypt sits there sort of thumbing its nose at that misconception in various forms. I mean, artistically, philosophically, spiritually, every possible way. The real Egypt is completely different from what's taught in school. In other words, the normal picture is that here are these crazy people who worshipped animals and were obsessed with death and who mummified their pharaohs because they believed in wink, wink, nod, nod, an afterlife. And yes, they produced masterpieces of art and architecture, which is sort of odd since otherwise they were so primitive. But nevertheless, real civilization starts with the Greeks, which is, in its own way, actually, what we're taught as history, is developed only in the 19th century by European and English and American scholars. Effectively, what it is a white supremacist, Eurocentric con job. Real civilization starts with Greece because they're Europeans. You can't possibly have started with the Semitic tribes or with Egypt or with sub-Saharan African nations, civilizations as well.
But the con job continues. We're still being taught.
Oh, totally. Yeah. If you watch any Discovery or National Pornographic, as I call it, National Pornographic documentary, it will take as its assumption that we of the Church of Progress, with our hydrogen bombs and our bobblehead dolls and our Disneylands, are superior in every possible way to the people who created the pyramids and the Sphinx and the fabulous temples and art of Egypt. It's a given. It goes unchallenged.
The people who created the Sphinx and the pyramids. So who were the Egyptians?
Well, that's another question. Because we, my colleague Robert Sharp and myself and a number of other colleagues, have basically exploded the notion, certainly the chronology of Egypt, in that the Sphinx is weathered by water, not by wind and sand, and for it to have been weathered by water, this is presented the Super Bowl of geology back in '91 and again in 2000, before the GSA, that's the Geological Society of America, which is the big, I just said, the Super Bowl of geology, and with virtually all of the geologists in full accord that we're right, that this is water weathering. And what that means, what that carries, it's not who cares about how old the Sphinx is. Well, you care in the sense of understanding that the Church of Progress is a con job, as it were, and we are, as should be obvious to every thinking human being, at a crisis point in our own civilization. So if everything before us is superstition, then, well, we're the best there is and we'll have to deal with it. If, however, we have a reversed, a diametrically opposed view of civilization and can prove it, then we have really important lessons to learn from the past. So with the Sphinx, not only is it the most spectacular sculpture on Earth, but the temples surrounding it, in front of it and next to it, are built of blocks of stone a quarter the size of this studio, blocks of stone slotted into place like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that weigh 50, 75, 100 tons each, and that we with our modern equipment could not reproduce those temples. So suddenly we're looking at a Sphinx that is at least dated back to 10,000 BC, but maybe a lot older than that.
10,000 BC, according to the water erosion?
For it to be weathered by water, it has to have been built almost certainly before 10,000 BC, and maybe a full processional cycle before that. The Egyptians themselves, we won't go into the details of it here because it's just too complex, but they talk about earlier rains, earlier whole sections of their own civilization that stretch back another processional cycle, in other words, back to around 36,000 BC or so. So Schott was originally very resistant to that older dating. Not really resistant, but just cautious. PhD, Yale PhD in geology, geophysics, and paleontology. So as a credentialed, highly credentialed scientist, he's almost honor bound to be as cautious as the data will allow him to be. But he's changed over the years. This is almost three decades that we've been working together.
But the facts show that the Sphinx is much, much older than what we have been told in school. So when you've learned this information, are you also learning like where the Egyptians had come from? Where did they suddenly pop out from?
That we don't know, actually. I mean, Egypt was the modern Egyptians are their own, probably a mixture of different races, because they're not Semitic Arabs. They're not like Syrians and Iraqis, and they're different. And when you go to Egypt, which I do all the time, of course, and you look at the people around you, and then you go to the museum, Cairo Museum, and you see that the same people. I have friends that look like Hatshepsut, friends that look like, one of the great scribes of the Third Dynasty. So we don't know. And actually, one of the big mysteries is the Sphinx itself, which we're almost certain the face of it has been recarved because the head is much too small for the body, and we feel that we're very certain when it's supposed to be the pharaoh Khafra, the builder of the second pyramid. All of these things that I'm sort of breezing by here are actually very complex scholarly discussions. But the head of the Sphinx is not original. It might have been a lion to begin with, it might have been a human face, we don't know, but one of the interesting things about it, particularly when you look at it in profile, is that it is very definitely a sub-Saharan African face. Not Egyptian, but sub-Saharan African. And of course this is the last thing in the world that the Egyptologists want to know, including the Egyptian Egyptologists. So, there's prejudice runs up and down.
Why do they not want to know that? Why?
Well, because they don't. Because that makes it even worse. That not only is the civilization, the civilization that produced this extraordinary sculpture and equally extraordinary temples, thousands and thousands of years older, but it may have been produced by sub-Saharan Africans, although the Sphinx is a recarving. See, it's very complex because we think the recarving takes place in very, very ancient times as well, but this is why we think the Sphinx could be much, much older, and that originally it's something else altogether. Maybe a lion, maybe a female face, maybe a king. We don't know. I mean, there's no way, once it's recarved, to tell what it was to begin with.
What is the function of the Sphinx? What have you learned?
Nobody really knows. I mean, with Egypt, they don't explain anything. It's up to us to interpret it correctly, and there are better and worse interpretations. According to Gurdjieff, and who knows where he got it from, the Sphinx is a symbol of an esoteric society. The ancient Egyptians, when they finally got around to talking about the Sphinx, I mean, it's been there from time immemorial, but it doesn't show up in Egyptian texts until somewhere in the New Kingdom, in other words, somewhere around 2000, 1500 BC, or thereabouts. And then it's called Horem Achet, which means Horus of the horizon. Well, Horus is basically the falcon god, the falcon principle, which represents the return to the source. I mean, that's what we're here on this earth for. And that's Schwaller de Lubicz terminology, return to the source, to avoid, let's say, specific religious terminology. But basically, that's the basis of all religions, ultimately. It's not about whether gays can be married or what a woman should do with her body or what we should smoke or drink. It's about our potential to return to our sacred origins. And so Horus Horus represents that principle, the principle of return. So Horus of the horizon means, looking at the stars effectively, the return to our stellar origins.
And the stellar origins of the Egyptians is...
Well, stellar origins of everybody, but this is, if this is taken literally, which I don't agree with, you're talking about aliens and you're getting into Sitchinini territory. But if it's taken, not exactly symbolically, but you might say energetically, in terms of consciousness, there is, in fact you find it in the book there, in The Serpent in the Sky, a series of carvings in gold on the second shrine of Tutankhamun that shows a mummiform figure with a star sort of in mummy wrappings, with a star in front of it, connected by lines of force or consciousness to the forehead, as the third eye of the mummified figure, which presupposes astrology, actually, in some way, shape, or form, but it presupposes, it formally establishes a connection between, let's say, stellar consciousness and human consciousness. That's the objective, is to become a star. Actually, in Egypt, that's formal. In this pyramid text, they talk about the dead king, or the realized individual. The king isn't the only one that can be immortal. The king is the prototype for all human beings. Everyone can do it. The king can do it, everyone can do it. This trickles down later and is basically the message of Christianity as well. But anyway, the text states that Ba, which is the divine spark, which we're all born with, unites with Ka, which is effectively our personality, our essence, becomes a star, and sails across the sky in the company of Ra, which is the solar principle, the initiating force, in his boat of millions of years. It's a very poetic way of expressing immortal life. And this trickles down and down and down. It's the Isis-Osiris myth in Egypt. It becomes Hamlet when Shakespeare is dealing with it, and he gets it from a Danish. This is why Hamlet is Danish, because Shakespeare got it from a Danish fairy tale. And it resurfaces not too long ago in The Lion King, particularly in the movie, where there's a scene that shows the lion cub pointing up at the stars and asking his father, "What are those?" And the Lion King, the father, says, "Those are the souls of dead kings." What that tells you is that whoever wrote that script, which is peculiar, Disney is a very strange outfit, because Disney himself was this terrible man, actually, who was a great genius. And in this case, you know that whoever wrote that script, and I forget who it is, knew their Egypt, because that's not in Hamlet. That strictly comes from Egypt, this connection between stellar and human consciousness. So this is actually the message of Egypt, and this is, of course, exactly the opposite of what you would get in any school, even university, even if you went for your master's and doctorate in Egyptology. They would still be saying, actually what they would be saying is, they might say that the Egyptians believe this or the Egyptians believe that. Never once, not once, is there a suggestion that, hey, maybe they knew and didn't just believe. Maybe you guys who are credulous and believe your rubbish about the Church of Progress, and maybe they actually knew, which is why they managed to keep a civilization together for 3,000 years, and ours is crumbling in front of our eyes.
When you refer before to Zachariah Sitchin, are you saying that you do not believe that the Egyptians were star-seeded or came from
Absolutely
a star?
not. No.
They're not. So
certainly not in his rendition, where they're aliens as malignant as ourselves, but just smarter, and that these aliens are misconstrued by the primitives of the time and become their gods. And if you actually look at Egyptian symbolism, you see how stupid that contention is. Because, for example, one of the Egyptian creation myths is that Atum, who is the god before there are any gods, you might say, that the sacred principle creates or manifests the universe through an act of masturbation. Symbolically, in other words, there's no female, so he can only express his love, as it were, through his own, you might say, his own decision. So in Sitchin terms, where does this come from? An alien is sort of pleasuring himself behind a tree, and the primitives come along and say, "Ooh, let's do a creation myth about that." And that's just one example. I mean, Sitchin has, unfortunately, a large following, who I call Sitchininis.
Sitchininis.
The Sitchininis. And I always left open the one possibility that his translations from the Assyrian were maybe correct, because I'm not an Assyriologist, and none of the people with the credentials took the time out to either verify or disqualify his translations. But recently, there was a guy whose name I forget, I have it on the computer, Fisher, I think, who is a biblical scholar and an Assyriologist, who actually takes the trouble, what's it called? It's called Sitchin is Wrong. There's a website, www.sitchiniswrong.com, I believe that's it. Mm-hmm. And he goes carefully into it and shows that even the translations, Sitchin's translations, are incorrect. And as far as I'm concerned, that's fine, because I find it an absolutely abhorrent false philosophy, as bad as our own, actually, as bad as the garbage that we learn in school that's passed off as science.
When you were in Egypt with the geologists and looking at the erosion, you were also looking at the erosion of the pyramids, correct?
No, that's different.
Is there
the pyramids
a different time?
Well, it's very complicated, because the pyramids, probably what we see today, does date from when the Egyptologists say they date, somewhere around 2500 BC. I mean, even Egyptologists can't be wrong all the time. So, but they are, and this is demonstrable, particularly the Khafra, the second and the third pyramid. There are earlier structures there that then probably got pretty ruinous, and the dynastic Egyptians, the Old Kingdom Egyptians, came along and either repaired or superimposed the pyramids that are there now upon the earlier structures. And there are places in the second pyramid and the third pyramid where you can actually prove this. And in the Great Pyramid, probably, it's an interesting case that Shock and I are actually working on, that it too is built in stages. And we're hoping to put the funding together to do the follow-up for our Mystery of the Sphinx, which is 20 years ago. 20 years ago? Yeah, full 20 years ago. To do the follow-up for it that really cements the case, because we have lots of further evidence gathered from around the world in the last couple of decades, and the wonderful site in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, which you've undoubtedly heard of. That's the smoking gun, because without, again, going into a long palaver, here's this amazing site of interlocked stone circles, like mini Stonehenges, but not so many. I mean, the central pillars of these extraordinary stone circles weigh 12 and 15 tons, and the archaeologist in charge of the dig, Klaus Schmidt, who is absolutely orthodox and meticulous, dates Göbekli Tepe to at least 10,000 BC and maybe older. That's our smoking gun, because one of the arguments, which is a fallacious argument, raised against our theory is, how could the Egyptians, this be that old? It's all hunter-gatherers back then. There were no tools, no anything. How could they have possibly built the Sphinx and the pyramids? Well, now there's Göbekli Tepe, and there's still no tools, but the archaeologists, and nobody's disagreeing with Klaus, with Schmidt, actually, the archaeologists accept it, but without going into the implications. We will go into the implications, because that's our smoking gun. Göbekli Tepe means the mere existence of Göbekli Tepe, and it's all, you should actually cut in some clips for Göbekli Tepe, in fact, when you're doing it, otherwise people won't know, won't understand what a mind-blowing archaeological discovery this is, with all of these symbolic, intricately carved, high-relief figures carved into the faces of these pillars.
Even so with some dinosaurs carved in, correct?
No, not dinosaurs.
Isn't there?
Not there.
No?
No. They're all vultures and all things, scorpions and lions, or anyway, a big feline of some sort. And then lots of symbolic figures, mysterious ones, all sorts of things. But Göbekli Tepe, in and of itself, destroys the whole paradigm of civilization, because assuming that they really were hunter-gatherers, they were nevertheless hunter-gatherers that could wrestle around 15-ton stones and apparently without any tools carve these intricate figures into the surfaces, not into, but high relief means you take away the surface and leave the figures, as it were, emerging out of the stone surface of these columns. So that puts an end to the argument, which isn't an argument, it's just an assumption, that the hell with the geology, the Sphinx and the pyramid can't be as old as we say it is, because they're all hunter-gatherers back then. Well, here we have the hunter-gatherers, and I'm assuming that they were, because why should you plant or do anything when the food falls off the trees and the animals are roaming around? You hunt them. Who needs agriculture when the life is bountiful enough not to require its development? Anyway, so we're hoping if we can put the funding together to do our sequel to Mystery of the Sphinx, to really get this out there and make an impact. I mean, the Mystery of the Sphinx was was a huge success when it came out. I mean, not just the Emmy, but 30 million people saw it. It had terrific ratings in America. Charlton Heston was the host, and I'm not a great Charlton Heston fan, but he was a wonderful host of this one. He really liked the thesis of it. Strangely enough, the right wingers have no real big problem with our science, and it's the liberal Darwinian left that can't handle it. I mean, the Church of Progress, the intellectual basis of the Church of Progress, tends to be politically more left-wing than right-wing, oddly enough.
Well, the whole world is completely altered by these historical facts.
That's right.
That we are much, much older, that the question then arises, where did we begin and how did we begin?
We don't know. I don't dismiss the alien notion. I don't like it. And
why don't you like it? And what do you mean by alien? You mean off planet?
UFOs. Yeah, I mean, UFOs are real. There's no doubt that there's something going on out there.
Yes.
But it just throws the problem into outer space. If they're so smart and they came to start our civilization, where'd they get it from? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not a solution at all. But it's also,
it can be an infinite source of.
That's my sense of it. In other words, that that it's part of cosmic consciousness, as it were, and when the time is right, cosmic consciousness produces human beings whose specific role is the return to the source. In other words, to give back to the universe to, let's say, to alchemically transform our own consciousness into a higher level that we give back to the universe. Basically, if you look at all of the great religions, no matter how they comport themselves nowadays, but all of the major religions have that as their basis. That's our function here. I mean, in Christianity it's called salvation, and in Buddhism and Hinduism it's nirvana or samadhi or whatever the word is, but it's basically all of it is, Schwaller calls it the return to the source, to avoid specific religious terminology, but that is the basis of all religions. It's something, not that you believe, it's something you do.
Mm-hmm. And also, so many of the indigenous peoples from our planet in Africa and America and South America, there is an ancient belief system that we do come from the stars.
Exactly.
The Pleiades, especially for many of the many of the North and South, and then Sirius as well. And of course, there's many people that speak about the Egyptians having the connection, of course, to Sirius.
Oh yeah.
So, understanding that we could be star-seeded or genetically modified by our very advanced alien brothers and sisters, what do you think could be the function of the pyramids then in Egypt? As you know, so many documentaries now talk about them as being power stations.
Well, they when you're in there, I mean, we rent the pyramid when I on my trips and have a 2-hour meditation session in the King's Chamber, and people come out changed. I mean, this is not.
So what's happening to people when they're?
Well, they're.
What happened to you?
Well, it's very powerful. I mean, I do it 4 times a year, you know, or however often I do the trips. It's hard to say specifically, but I really do think that one of the reasons I'm in pretty good shape for my age, and I mean, I still get up to the pyramids. It's about a 14-story climb to get up to the King's Chamber, and I do it as well as most of the guys on the trip who are half my age. Funnily enough, actually, there was a national pornographic. You know why I call it that?
Please explain.
You don't know, so you're too young.
When
I was a kid, the only place that you could see naked women was in the National Geographic, because they'd shoot African tribes, so they could, you know, they didn't count the African tribes, so you could show bare-breasted women. So everybody had a subscription to all the teenagers had a subscription to the National Geographic. Nowadays, you don't have to, you don't need to go to the National Geographic to see that. Anyway, or Discovery with National Geographic, or Discovery, and it was a documentary about the pyramids, and they referred to them as immortality machines. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Of course, the Egyptians, superstitious as they were, believed that. Actually, I think that's probably somewhere close. They in some way, shape, or form fulfilled a scientific but spiritual function. They knew what they were doing building those things. They knew what they were doing orienting in the Great Pyramid, the shafts, the specific stars, even the quackademics, as I call them.
To the Sirius system?
To Sirius and I think the belt stars of Orion. I forget exactly which is which. They're not doing that. Even the quackademics now agree that those are not ventilation shafts, which they originally thought. And if they're ventilation shafts, what are they ventilating if it's supposed to be the tomb of a megalomaniac king? But it's not a tomb either. That's equally fallacious, that the pyramids, not just the Great Pyramid, but the other great pyramids of Giza and Dashur, which is even Saqqara plays a role in that. We're not places where a megalomaniac king was buried, but rather served some sort of a function. And more specific than that I can't get, but whoever, the wink, wink, nod, nod people of Discovery or National Geographic. I think that's basically it. They were immortality machines. In other words, they were, in some way and for some reason, designed to, let's say, enhance further that quest for immortality. See, now Egypt is a one-issue civilization. Everything is devoted, everything that's left of it was devoted to this quest for immortality. And I think that's one of the reasons why it lasted 3,000 years. And this, as I said earlier, no Egyptologist would disagree with that, actually. They just think that it's all hogwash and superstition. And I say, going to the line in the Bible, Matthew, I think it is, by their fruits you shall know them. You want to know about a civilization, what its soul is, you look at where it puts its creative energy. Egypt is remarkable in that, one, there's so much of it left, and two, nowhere else on earth do you have a testament to what civilized people do with their creative energy. I mean, yes, they had their wars and they fell in love and they had problems and all the rest of it, but basically their creative energies went into the quest for immortality and the connection between humanity and higher consciousness. And if you want to know the difference between Egypt and ourselves, or Egypt and any other civilization, just look where it puts its creative energy. With us, it goes into weapons of mass destruction, sarin gas, cranking foods, Disney World, bobblehead dolls, and a little bit left over for real science and real medicine. And that's why we're a bunch of lunatics and the Egyptians were civilized human beings.
What has been your last experience when you were inside the pyramid? What
happened?
Well,
it's pretty much a constant with me. I'm able to get into, almost instantly, in a very deep meditative state. And I'm not, I do meditation in the Gurdjieff group that I'm in, but I'm not by nature a meditative kind of person. And there, I get a kind of a focus, a centering that is otherwise rather difficult to achieve. And most of the people with me also get that. We come out of that pyramid in silence for the most part, and with everyone understanding that they've had an experience that they've never had before in their lives. And
does it feel like you're expanding? Does it feel like it opens you up, or does it open up the heart?
Well, it does. Yes, it's profoundly emotional, and it affects almost everyone, but differently. I've been in there with people started speaking in tongues a couple of times, and occasionally people get spooked and have to leave, but that's very, very rare. Mostly, it's this sense of kind of like, or analogous to hearing a great, great piece of music for the first time. It is musical. In Egypt, the experiences of the temples is similar to music. I sometimes describe the trip to Egypt as listening to all of, the best of Beethoven and the best of Monteverdi and the best of Mozart and Bach, one after the other on the best earphones you can find.
So
it's this drumbeat of the highest expression of art and architecture on the planet.
It's frequency.
It is frequency.
It's a frequency.
It's all frequency.
You're literally being altered in your frequency.
Exactly. The same way as music. Goethe described architecture as frozen music, which is technically, not just poetically true. It really is. Mm-hmm. When you go into these temples, you see they're consecrated to the gods, who were always understood as superstitious creatures with animal heads and so on. But really, what the gods are the embodiments of cosmic principles. So there's a Horus principle and a Hathor principle and an Amun principle, and these principles are associated with specific numbers or sets of numbers, which in turn give rise to specific proportions, geometries, measures, and so on. And when these are employed by initiated architects into these amazing structures, when you go in there, you are effectively into a Hathor temple or a Horus temple, whatever. Effectively, you are you are immersing yourself, you might say, in Horus music or in Hathor music or in Ammon music, and even in ruins, and even though the doctrine is now, it's alien to us, it's not our doctrine anymore, you can't miss it when you go in there, and particularly when you get it from, on my trips, we go to great lengths to be there when nobody's there, or when very few people are there, so it's not like trying to listen to Bach in the middle of the Super Bowl. And now, of course, is the time to go because nobody's there. Everybody's afraid to go. Mm-hmm. I'm not. But
so let me ask you about we have pyramids now all over the world that people are discovering. Do you believe it's the same type of energies that are being generated inside these other pyramids?
Maybe, probably, because they're all over the place, and there's no rational explanation for why they should be, so many of them.
Rational according to...
Well, according to the usual sort of explanation. Why should they build pyramids in the first place? So I really don't know, but I suspect, and they're built at different times, yet they're a kind of a constant, and there's a sort of a broad belt where the pyramids occur in. They don't occur to the very far north, they don't occur very far south. So maybe, I don't know. See, I mean, our own work, the subject of Atlantis comes up all the time, but our own work really does indicate that whether or not there was an actual physical Atlantis, what there was an extremely developed and sophisticated civilization that went down almost certainly under catastrophic conditions. Schock is really studying this in a big way. He thinks it's one of the plasma ejections from the sun that's responsible for the breakup of this civilization, that if you're going to call it Atlantis in inverted quotes, Atlantis, not that it's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or anywhere else, but that it's global. And that's our conviction, and that information, or let's say that doctrine, when everything fell apart, leaked down or percolated down through the various civilizations that subsequently arose with lots of changes, but also a lot of similarities. That's the work of my colleague who lives here nearby in Albany, Laird Scranton, who's showing, and I think in indisputable form, that the ancient cosmologies are all linked to each other, and that they come from somewhere. They come from a very ancient common source. So the pyramids are part of that doctrine, but it's still a big mystery as to what they were meant for in the first place, and then why and how they should be widespread. They should be practically everywhere you look within that belt. I forget exactly what the latitudes are.
That's very specific.
But it's quite specific, and they're there.
We do have a final question. All of our interviews are a part of a series which is the Global Love Now movement that we launched in the summer of 2013. And we're traveling around the world and making a documentary and interviewing scientists and scholars and spiritual leaders and guys on the street, and trying to bring more information to the general public about what is our reality, what are we doing, where are we going. And the essence of our movement, of course, is love. So we always ask our guests, what is love?
Well, it depends how you answer it. You can answer it philosophically, you can answer it physically. Everybody knows what it is physically. But it is, let's say, it's plugging into the cosmic creative impulse at one level or another. On the physical, as I said, that's easy. Everybody knows what that is, but it's a very powerful, the most powerful emotion that we can experience without having to work for it, as it were. Well, you do have to work for it, sort of, but nevertheless, that's the idea. And that on the higher levels, I mean, for the artist, it's the inspiration that provokes a Ninth Symphony or a Vespers of 1610 or the Temple of Luxor, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the creative impulse manifests, so let's say love is the creative impulse that manifests over a spectrum of disciplines, you might say.
Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you,
we
Susie.
look forward to speaking to you again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I'm game for it. Let's see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.